her pixie face glowing under the spiky black hair. "Happy birthday, Bella!" "Shh!" I hissed, glanced around to make sure that no one heard her. The last thing I wanted was some kind of celebration of the black event. She ignored me. "Do you want to open your present now or later?" she asked eagerly as we made our way to where Edward was waiting. "No present," I protested in a mumble. She finally seemed to process my mood. "Okay, later then." "Did you like the scrapbook your mom sent you? And the camera from Charlie?" I sighed. Of course she would know what my birthday presents were. Edward wasn't the only member in his family with unusual skills. Alice would have seen what my parents were planning as soon as they decided that themselves. "Yeah, they're great. I think it's a nice idea. You're only a senior once. Might as well document the experience." "How many times have you been a senior?" "That's different." We reached Edward then, and he held his hand out for mine. I took it eagerly, forgetting, for a moment, my glum mood. His skin was, as always, smooth, hard, and very cold. He gave my fingers a gentle squeeze, and I looked into his liquid topaz eyes, and my heart gave a not-so-gentle squeeze of its own. Hearing the stutter in my heartbeats, he smiled again. He lifted his free hand and traced one cool fingertip around the outside of my lips as he spoke. "So, as discussed, I am not allowed to wish you happy birthday. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is correct." I could never quite mimic the flow of his perfect formal articulation. It was something that could have only been picked up in an earlier century. "Just checking." He ran his hands through his tousled bronze hair. "You might have changed your mind. Most people seem to enjoy things like birthdays and gifts." Alice laughed, and the sound was all silver, a wind chime. "Of course you'll enjoy it. Everyone is supposed to be nice to you and give you your way, Bella. What's the worst that can happen?" She meant it as a rhetorical question. "Getting older," I answered anyway, and my voice was not as steady as I wanted it to be. Beside me, Edward's smile tightened into a hard line. 18 isn't very old," Alice said. "Don't women usually wait until they're 29 to get upset over birthdays?" "It's older than Edward," I mumbled. He sighed. "Technically," she said, keeping her tone light, "just by one little year, though." And I supposed, if I could be sure of the future that I wanted, sure that I would get to spend forever with Edward and Alice and the rest of the Cullens, preferably not as a wrinkled old lady, then a year or two in one direction or the other wouldn't matter to me so much. But Edward was dead set against any future that changed me, any future that made me like him, that made me immortal too. An impasse, he called it. I couldn't really see Edward's point, to be honest. What was so great about mortality? Being a vampire didn't look like such a terrible thing. Not the way that the Cullens did it, anyway. "What time will you be at the house?" Alice continued, changing the subject. From her expression, she was up to exactly the kind of thing I've been hoping to avoid. "I didn't know I had plans to be there." "Oh, be fair, Bella," she complained. "You aren't going to ruin all of our fun like that, are you?" "I thought my birthday was about what I want." "I'll get her from Charlie's right after school," Edward told her, ignoring me altogether. "I have work," I protested. "You don't actually," Alice told me smugly. "I already called Mrs. Newton about it. She's trading your shifts. She said to tell you happy birthday." I still can't come over," I stammered, scrambling for an excuse. Well, I haven't watched Romeo and Juliet yet for English." Alice snorted. "You have Romeo and Juliet memorized." "But Mr. Birdie said we needed to see it performed to fully appreciate it. That's how Shakespeare intended it to be presented." Edward rolled his eyes. "You've already seen the movie," Alice accused. "But not the 1960s version. Mr. Birdie said it was the best." Finally, Alice lost a smug smile and glared at me. "This can be easy or this can be hard, Bella, but one way or another," Edward interrupted her threat. "Relax, Alice. If Bella wants to watch a movie, then she can. It's her birthday. So there, I added. I'll bring her over around 7, he continued. That will give you more time to set up. Alice's laughter chimed again. Sounds good. See you tonight, Bella. It'll be fun. You'll see. She grinned. The wide smile exposed all her perfect glistening teeth, then pecked me on the cheek and danced off toward her first class before I could respond. Edward, please, I started to beg, but he pressed one cool finger to my lips. Let's discuss it later. We're going to be late for class. No one bothered to stare at us as we took our seats in the back of the classroom. We had almost every class together now. It was amazing the favors Edward can get the female administrators to do for him. Edward and I had been together too long now to be the object of gossip anymore. Even Mike Newton didn't bother to give me the glum stare that used to make me feel a little guilty. He smiled now instead, and I was glad he seemed to have accepted that we could only be friends. Mike had changed over the summer. His face had lost some of the roundness, making his cheekbones more prominent, and he was wearing his pale blonde hair in a new way. Instead of bristly, it was longer and gelled into a careful, casual disarray. It was easy to see where his inspiration came from, but Edward's look wasn't something that can be achieved through imitation. As the day progressed, I considered a way to get out of whatever was going down at the Cullens' house tonight. It would be bad enough to have to celebrate when I was in the mood to mourn, but worse than that, this was sure to involve attention and gifts. Attention is never a good thing, as any other accident-prone klutz would agree. No one wants a spotlight when they're likely to fall on their face. And I very pointedly asked, well ordered really, that no one give me presents this year. It looked like Charlie and Renee weren't the only ones who decided to overlook that. I never had much money, and that had never bothered me. Renee had raised me on a kindergarten teacher's salary. Charlie wasn't getting richer at his job either. He was the police chief here in the tiny town of Forks. My only personal income came from the 3 days a week I worked at the local sporting goods store. In this town, I was lucky to have a job. Every penny I made went into my microscopic college fund. College was plan B. I was still hoping for plan A, but Edward was just so stubborn about leaving me human. Edward had a lot of money. I didn't even want to think about how much. Money meant next to nothing to Edward or the rest of the Cullens. It was just something that accumulated when you had unlimited time on your hands and a sister who had an uncanny ability to predict trends in the stock market. Edward didn't seem to understand why I objected to him spending money on me. Why it made me uncomfortable if he took me to an expensive restaurant in Seattle. Why he wasn't allowed to buy me a car that could reach the speed limit over 55 miles an hour. Or why I wouldn't let him pay for my college tuition. He was ridiculously enthusiastic about Plan B. Edward thought that I was being unnecessarily difficult. But how could I let him give me things when I had nothing to reciprocate with? He, for some unfathomable reason, wanted to be with me. Anything he gave me on top of that just threw us more out of balance. As the day went on, neither Edward or Alice brought up my birthday again, and I began to relax a little. We sat at our usual table for lunch. A strange kind of truce existed at that table. The three of us, Edward, Alice, and I, sat on the extreme southern end of the table. Now that the older and somewhat scarier, in Emmett's case certainly, Cullen siblings had graduated, Alice and Edward did not seem quite so intimidating. We did not sit here alone.